Welcome to this podcast celebrating the launch of the Open University's Trends in Learning Report 2020. I'm Martin Cousins, a corporate learning journalist, and in this podcast we will be looking at the Trends in Learning Report and highlighting some of the trends that will be impacting on organisations in the not too distant future. The Trends in Learning Report is based on the OU's research into the future of learning. Each year, the OU's Innovating Pedagogy Report shares the key themes from that research. To guide us through these trends, I am joined by Professor Agnes Kukulska-Hulme. Agnes, could you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do at the OU?
Yes, hello. I'm Professor Agnes Kukulska-Hulme. I lead the Future Learning programme at the Open University. It's a research and innovation programme where we explore the upcoming trends and innovations in educational technologies and try and formulate some visions for the future and advice for educators so that they can readily understand what's coming up and adapt their practices to it.
Great. And could you give us some background on the Innovating Pedagogy Report? You know, what it is, why it's produced, and give us some sense of how you pull it together.
So this report has quite a long pedigree now. It's been going for a number of years, since 2012, where it was when it was started up by a small group of colleagues. So I took over the lead for this report last year. And it's been a very successful series, so we're very happy to be able to produce this report every year. Mm-hmm. It's a way for us to share our knowledge, our understanding, our insights about emerging and innovative approaches in teaching, learning and assessment. And what's important here is that the approaches that we describe are all backed up by some evidence from research and practice, which means that they've been shown to work in particular settings. There's some evidence that they work. Sometimes these innovations are inspired by the use of technology, but our emphasis is particularly on pedagogy rather than technology per se. And so, a few years ago, we identified this need for evidence-informed practical guidance for teachers and policymakers that would help them make sense of emerging pedagogical approaches. We find that these people often want to make improvements in teaching and learning in their context, but they're not very well informed about what can work and how it works. Perhaps they don't have time to look at the research literature or review the latest innovations for themselves. So we try and smooth the path for them. And we try to describe the pedagogical innovations in very accessible ways. I think that's something that is a hallmark of what we do. Very much in line with what the Open University tries to do, make learning accessible so that these innovations can be understood by anyone working in education and training. And also, I think what's important is that we try to cross the boundaries between different sectors and levels and subjects. And that, again, may be quite unique in that we try and say, well, here's an innovation that's taken place in the primary school sector, but it could also be applicable in higher education or in a training context. So I think these are some of the key aspects of our reports.
Mm-hmm. And so, sorry, I was just going to ask there that, it's been produced for many years.
Yeah.
So there are many innovations. So how do you go about identifying the innovations and prioritizing them each year?
So the work is done by a small group of colleagues in the Institute of Educational Technology. here at the Open University. And we also invite one external partner to collaborate with us every year on that year's report. So each year, the new pedagogies are initially identified by the authors by really proposing pedagogies that they have recently come across in their research and their professional practice. Typically at conferences and seminars and webinars, in publications and reports, and of course on social media. So we try and gather together our intelligence on what we've heard about and what sounds promising and interesting. And then what we do is that we write some brief notes about each of these proposed pedagogies. So we have a long list initially, and we try and identify evidence from research and practice for each one. Now, this is usually done in a collaborative online document, and we also typically have a discussion in a video conference. So we talk about what our findings and try and come to some agreement about the most interesting and promising pedagogies. And then these are prioritized through a collaborative process of online voting.
Okay.
And then it's a subjective prioritization, but I think it reflects our collective understanding of what innovations are likely to have an impact on education. And then what we do is that we co-author the text for each selected pedagogy. And we peer review the sections so that authors are involved both in drafting sections and in reading and commenting on other sections and adding references and resources and scrutinizing the evidence, questioning the evidence. So it's quite a detailed process, highly collaborative and creative in some ways. And then we end up with the 10 selected pedagogies that we then, present in our report.
Yeah. And how long does it typically take then to put this all together?
It's quite a long process. We usually start in April, and then over the months that follow, we do the work, and by the autumn we have something that is a ready draft that is then refined and goes into production. So then we have the process of production towards the end and have something ready around about Christmas time and then launch it in January.
Okay. So this year's report then, we have 10 innovations. Which ones have caught your eye and why?
I was involved in drafting the social justice pedagogy section because this connects quite closely with my own research on the ways in which migrants and refugees can be enabled to learn with mobile technologies. And within that research, there's a very strong social justice theme, which essentially means that we're trying to give the learners more say in how they organize and engage their learning and how they engage in it and what is the content of their learning as well. And that's very much in the spirit of this social justice pedagogy, giving people a voice, using technologies in enabling ways to do that. So that's one of the themes that's particularly close to my heart. But overall, I think also the artificial intelligence in education theme and the ethical challenges surrounding AI and also the sharing of personal data is a very important contemporary theme, and also one that I'm interested in. Because of the proliferation of AI systems throughout society, increasingly we use intelligent personal assistants on our smartphones and on our home devices. And these will, I think, be used within learning contexts in the future. So we really need to understand this area. It's quite challenging for most people to get their head around artificial intelligence. It used to be a specialist area for researchers. So the challenge of opening that up to everybody is wonderful, and something that we're very excited about. Other themes that I think are important are the ones that highlight the use of multiple senses and multisensory experiences, immersive learning. I think increasingly we're seeing the use of video and 3D experiences coming to the fore, and that's something that we'll see, into the future. And I think another important theme is overcoming barriers to learning. Thinking about people's circumstances. Do they have access to the internet? Is the internet connection affordable for them? Do they have access to the latest technologies? And sort of understanding people's personal contexts and their personal networks helps us to think about how technologies, together with the pedagogies that are well aligned to their use, can help to overcome barriers to learning.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, the OU has started producing a report for the corporate learning sector called the Trends in Learning Report, and it uses some of the innovations rather that come out of the Innovating Pedagogy report. And you have highlighted earlier on in this interview the role of evidence-informed practice, and that is something that's becoming increasingly important in the corporate learning sector. And I'm just reflecting on the breadth of the innovations in this report, but there seem to be some common themes through this that you've just been talking about, like data, ethics, accessibility in its broadest terms. So that it looks like there are some big themes here that will potentially translate into the corporate learning space, or if at the very least be themes that corporate learning professionals will be quite familiar with. Do you think that's the case?
Yes, I think so. If you look back at the reports, so we now have 8 reports, you can identify certainly overarching themes. And in the past, we have often emphasized collaboration and communication as overarching themes. Also, inquiry is a prominent theme, sort of identifying big questions that can be pursued through the use of technologies and online networks. So it's true that although we have these specific although we have these specific innovations that we identify every year, they do collectively represent some overarching themes that are important to consider when we're designing learning.
Yeah, and do you think, in terms of reflecting on your role and that of your colleagues who produce this report, do you think you have an increasingly important role in translating the research into something that's accessible for practitioners to really be able to start to adopt in their working practices?
Yes, definitely. Nowadays, everybody's faced with information overload, and there are so many publications coming out. We can see this in the research that increasingly there is a drive towards producing systematic reviews of research publications, because no one really has time to read the individual papers. So we need people to bring together everything that's been published and make sense of it, and draw out, the main findings, and identify gaps and directions for travel. So I think that's something that we're seeing in the world of research, and is equally applicable in other domains of activity, where there's a need to look across what's been published, what's been produced, and bring it all together so that people can move forward with a better understanding based on that research.
Yeah. And is there anything else you would add about this year's report and its innovations that you think people should know, that you have a burning message to share from it?
Well, what's interesting for us in the way that we compile these reports is that we have different perspectives on the innovations. Each of us has a different disciplinary background. So, for example, my own background is in linguistics and language learning, and then there are colleagues who have, for example, a science background or a philosophy background. So in assessing the innovations, we bring these perspectives to bear upon our understanding of what's important and salient about these innovations. And I think that's a sort of more general message as well, the importance of different perspectives. And that's perhaps a theme that I would also suggest for the current report, looking at different perspectives, appreciating the experience and the knowledge that different people come with or bring to the table. So, for example, understanding that those who engage in online games, such as we have described in the esports section, have something to teach us about how they learn together in large online platforms, something that, for example, teachers may not be very familiar with, so they can learn from the learners. And that is something that I'd like to highlight for us all.
That's great. Professor Agnes Kukulska-Hulme, I'd like to thank you for sharing your insights on the Innovating Pedagogy 2020 report, and for giving us the background and the context for the OU's Trends in Learning report. Organisations keen to understand more about the new trends impacting on learning can download the Trends in Learning report at open.ac.uk/business. Professor Agnes Kukulska-Hulme, thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.